The blue light filled the entire room where world leaders sat together in the United Nations building. Everyone looked up as the alien appeared in front of them like a ghost made of light. His name was Velkrin, and he came from something called the Galactic Council. His body was tall and thin and moved in ways that made people feel uncomfortable. He looked at all the humans like they were small children who needed to be taught a lesson. Velkrin spoke, and his words came out in perfect English, even though his mouth moved differently. He said that his people had been watching Earth for a long time. He said they had decided that humans were not ready to rule themselves. He called humans a Class 3 primitive species, which made everyone in the room angry, but they stayed quiet. Velkrin told them that Earth had to give up all weapons and let the Council take over. He said humans had exactly 72 hours to agree, or the Council would force them to obey. President Daniel Harper stood up from his chair. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes, but his voice was strong when he spoke. He told Velkrin that Earth was free and humans had done nothing wrong. He asked why the Council thought they could just take over a whole planet. Velkrin made a clicking sound that might have been laughing. He said it was not taking over, but bringing civilization. He said the Council had kept peace across 14,000 worlds for 3,000 years. He said human wars and pollution and chaos would end now whether humans liked it or not. Then the blue light disappeared and Velkrin was gone. The room stayed silent for a long moment. Nobody knew what to say. They had just been told that aliens existed and those aliens wanted to control Earth. Some people looked scared and others looked angry, but everyone knew things had just changed. Forever. Far away in a military building called the Pentagon, Admiral Jack Morrison hit his hand hard on the table. He was a big man with a rough voice and he did not like being threatened. He said the aliens thought humans would just give up because they had fancy ships and strange powers. A woman named Linda Grant, who was in charge of defense, looked at computer screens showing information about the alien ships. She said there were 43 alien vessels floating above Earth right now. She said their technology was hundreds or maybe thousands of years more advanced than anything humans had. She said every test they ran showed that humans would lose a fight. Morrison said they needed to run new tests. He said humans did not survive this long by giving up when things looked bad. He said they would find a way to fight back. Linda looked worried, but she nodded and started making calls to scientists and military leaders around the world. In Europe, at a place called CERN, a scientist named Henry Clark stared at math equations on his computer screen. He had spent 5 years working on something he called the quantum cascade drive. It was supposed to let spaceships move faster than light by bending space itself. Other scientists said it was impossible. The people who gave money for research said it was just science fiction and would never work. But Henry kept working on it anyway because he believed it could be done. His phone buzzed and he saw a message telling him to come to a military meeting right away. He grabbed his coat and rushed out the door. Maybe now someone would listen to his ideas. Up in space on the biggest alien ship called Eternal Harmony, Commander Zarek looked at reports about Earth. He was confident that humans would obey just like every other species had obeyed before. He remembered how the Vryn tried to fight back but gave up quickly. He remembered how the Korthal tried to negotiate but eventually accepted Council rule. All species learned that the Council was too powerful to resist. One of his officers told him they were seeing strange energy readings from Earth's surface. Zarek barely paid attention. He said humans were probably shutting down their factories to prepare for surrender. He told his officer to keep watching, but he was not worried at all. What Zarek did not know was that in 100 secret locations all over Earth, humans were getting ready for war. They were not planning to surrender. They were planning to fight back with everything they had. In underground bases and hidden laboratories, people worked faster than they had ever worked before. Scientists who normally spent years on research were being told they had 3 days. Engineers who built things carefully were being told to build fast and hope it worked. Military leaders who planned for months were making plans in hours. General Catherine Hayes stood in a secret bunker deep under a mountain. She was coordinating everything, and everyone called the plan Operation Homebound. Every soldier and every weapon on Earth was being moved to new positions. They were not getting ready to surrender. They were getting ready to fight. She asked about Henry Clark's drive, and a young officer named Peter Yang told her it had never been tested in real life. He said if it failed, it might create a black hole that would destroy half a continent. Catherine looked at him with cold eyes and said if they did not try, then humans would become slaves to aliens who thought they were too stupid to rule themselves. She told Peter to tell Henry he could test his drive for real. She said there was no more time to be careful. At NASA, an engineer named Maria Santos was working on a different problem. She had figured out that the alien shields could stop any weapon humans had. Nuclear bombs would not work. Missiles would not work. Nothing could get through. But shields needed power, and Maria thought she found a weakness. The aliens used something called zero-point energy, which meant they pulled power from empty space itself. It seemed perfect and unlimited, but Maria noticed that their power systems created tiny ripples in space when they worked. She thought if humans could make the right kind of interference signal, they could make the shields fail for maybe 30 seconds. 30 seconds was not long, but it might be enough to hurt the aliens. She told military leaders she needed 48 hours and every scientist who was not working on the space drive. They gave her 24 hours and half the scientists. It would have to be enough because time was running out, and Earth needed every advantage it could get if they were going to survive what was coming next. The clock kept ticking, and everyone on Earth knew they were running out of time. In the secret bunker under the mountains, General Catherine Hayes watched screens that showed military movements happening all over the planet. Every soldier and every weapon was being moved to new hiding places. The operation was called Homebound, and it was the biggest coordinated military movement in human history. Everyone had to work together or they would all fall apart. Catherine asked again about Henry Clark and his experimental drive. Major Peter Yang pulled up new information on his computer and told her that Henry said the drive was still just theory. It had only been tested on computers and never in real life. Peter said if something went wrong, the drive could create a black hole that would swallow half the country. Catherine looked at him with hard eyes and said they had no choice. She said if they did nothing, then humans would become slaves to aliens who thought Earth people were too primitive to make their own decisions. She told Peter to give Henry permission to test the drive with a real ship. She said they were out of time to play it safe. At a NASA building in California, Maria Santos was working on her plan to break the alien shields. She had gathered a team of the smartest physicists on the planet, and they were all working on the same problem. She explained to military commanders on video screens that the alien shields could stop anything humans could throw at them. Nuclear weapons would bounce off. Regular missiles would do nothing. Energy weapons would be absorbed. But she had found something interesting about how the shields worked. The aliens used zero-point energy, which meant they pulled power directly from empty space. It was incredibly efficient and seemed to have no limit. But Maria discovered that their energy collectors created tiny distortions in space around them. If humans could generate the exact right frequency of interference, they could cause a cascade failure in the shield system. The shields would collapse for about 30 seconds before the alien computers fixed the problem. Admiral Morrison asked if 30 seconds was enough time to do real damage. Maria smiled and said 30 seconds was plenty of time to hurt them badly. Catherine asked if Maria could turn this discovery into an actual weapon. Maria said if she had 48 hours and every physicist who was not working on the space drive, then yes, she could build it. She got 24 hours and half the scientists she asked for. Everyone agreed it would have to be enough because the deadline was getting closer with every passing minute. Meanwhile, up in orbit, the aliens were getting impatient. Ambassador Velcrin sent messages to Earth every hour reminding humans that time was running out. Each message sounded more insulting than the last one. Velcrin kept saying that the Council was offering Earth a gift. He said membership in the galactic civilization meant no more war, and no more poverty, and no more suffering. He made it sound like humans should be grateful. What Velcrin did not understand was that humans did not want to give up their freedom, even if the Council promised to solve all their problems. Humans wanted to make their own choices and their own mistakes and find their own path to greatness. That was not something they would ever surrender, no matter how powerful the aliens were. In cities around the world like Tokyo and Beijing and Moscow and London and Delhi, governments were quietly moving people away from areas that might become battlefields. The leaders had made their choice, and now they were preparing their citizens for what might happen next. Nobody wanted innocent people to die, but everyone knew that fighting for freedom always had a cost. Henry Clark had not slept in 60 hours. His hands shook as he typed final calculations into the computer that controlled the prototype drive. The drive was attached to an experimental spacecraft that barely looked like a real ship. It had been built in a hurry using parts from 3 different space programs. They called it the ECS Defiance because that is what it represented. Henry told the test pilot that the math looked good. Her name was Lisa Park, and she was a commander in the space program. Henry explained that in theory she would punch through normal space and come out anywhere within a light-year radius. She would be moving faster than light without actually moving at all. Space itself would bend around her. Lisa asked what would happen if the math was wrong. Henry took a breath and said she would probably be spread across several dimensions at the same time, which would be very unfortunate. Lisa laughed even though her voice sounded nervous. She said when he put it that way, how could she refuse to try? Catherine announced over the command network that they had 20 hours left until the deadline. She told all units to prepare for Operation Homebound. She said this was not a drill. She said this was humanity declaring independence from aliens who thought they could just take over. On the big alien ship called Eternal Harmony, Commander Zarek noticed that activity on Earth was increasing. He saw weapons being moved and troops being deployed. Energy readings were spiking in unusual patterns. It almost looked like humans were preparing for war. Zarek found this amusing. He thought it was cute that the primitives thought they could fight back. He ordered his officers to prepare pacification protocols. He said they would use precision strikes on military bases. He told them to minimize casualties because the goal was to teach humans their place, not to exterminate them. His officers moved to follow his orders. They were all confident because the Council had pacified 300 rebellious worlds in its long history. Humanity would just be number 301. What Zarek and his officers did not understand was that they were about to face something the Galactic Council had never encountered before. They were about to fight a species that was too stubborn and too creative and too angry to accept defeat. Humans had been fighting and surviving for their entire existence. They knew how to turn disadvantages into advantages. They knew how to innovate when their backs were against the wall. They knew how to refuse to give up even when the odds seemed impossible. The deadline was approaching fast and both sides were ready. The aliens were confident in their superior technology and their long history of easy victories. The humans were desperate and determined and armed with new weapons that had never been tested. Nobody knew what would happen when the 72 hours finally ran out, but everyone knew the galaxy was about to change forever. The deadline ended at 6 in the morning. For exactly 12 minutes, nothing happened. Earth held its breath and waited. The 43 alien ships hung in space like swords that were about to fall. Then Commander Zarek gave the order to begin. He told his fleet to start pacification. He ordered them to disable military bases and communication centers and power plants. He said to use non-lethal protocols only. He wanted to show the humans how futile it was to resist. Energy beams came down from space like lightning. In Nevada, an Air Force Base runway melted into liquid metal. In Russia, an early warning radar complex just disappeared. The alien weapons were precise and terrifying in their accuracy, but the attacks hit exactly where humans expected them to hit. Major Peter Yang reported from the command bunker that all targets struck were decoys. The real military assets had been moved days ago according to the homebound plan. 0 casualties. The aliens had destroyed empty buildings and abandoned equipment. General Catherine Hayes understood what was happening. She said the aliens were testing Earth to show what their weapons could do. She said it was time to show them what humans could do. She asked Maria Santos if the frequency disruptor was ready. In the Australian desert at a hidden facility, Maria stood in front of a massive machine that looked like a combination of a particle accelerator and a satellite dish. She said the disruptor was online and ready. She said they were targeting the flagship. She started counting down from 3. The device began to hum with a sound that made people's teeth hurt and their eyes water. Then it released an invisible pulse of quantum interference that traveled toward space at light speed. The pulse was designed to match the exact frequency of the alien shield generators and cause them to fail. On the Eternal Harmony, alarm systems suddenly started screaming. The tactical officer shouted that shield integrity was compromised. He said there was a cascading failure in the 0-point extraction nodes. He said shields were down in all sections. Zarek's sensory stalks extended fully in shock. He demanded that shields be restored immediately. The tactical officer said he was working on it and estimated restoration in 28 seconds. 28 seconds was a lifetime in combat. Catherine gave one word: fire. From hidden positions all over Earth, humanity's weapons spoke. They did not use nuclear weapons because the aliens would have detected those and stopped them. Instead, they used electromagnetic railguns. These weapons accelerated tungsten projectiles to almost the speed of light. The projectiles were invisible until they hit their targets. The Eternal Harmony shuddered as metal penetrators tore through its hull. 3 alien destroyers took critical damage. 1 cruiser simply broke into pieces as kinetic energy ripped it apart. The aliens had abandoned such primitive weapons thousands of years ago. They never expected anyone to still use them. The tactical officer gasped that shields were restored, but they had taken heavy damage. Hull breaches on multiple decks. Casualties being reported. Zarek stared at his display in genuine shock. They had been hurt. Actually hurt by primitives who should not have been able to scratch their paint. Zarek ordered all ships to scatter into combat formation. He said to prepare to return fire with lethal force. He wanted those weapon positions found and destroyed immediately. But the railgun positions were already gone. They had been mounted on huge mobile platforms that scattered in every direction. The alien targeting computers could not keep up with the chaos. Catherine said it was time. In orbit near the moon, the ECS Defiance powered up its quantum cascade drive. Commander Lisa Park's hands were steady on the controls. Her voice was calm as she announced the drive was charging. 10 seconds to activation. Henry Clark watched from mission control. He was terrified and excited at the same time. He told Lisa she was going to make history one way or another. Lisa said that was very comforting. She announced the drive was at full power. She started counting down from 3. Space folded in on itself. To the alien sensors, the tiny human ship simply vanished. Its quantum signature collapsed into nothing. Then 5 seconds later, it reappeared directly behind the alien formation. It had traveled a distance that should have taken hours and done it in a heartbeat. Lisa transmitted that Phase 1 was complete. She said the drive works and repeated it for emphasis. She said humanity was now a faster-than-light species. Across the entire command network from pole to pole, people cheered. Scientists hugged each other. Soldiers pumped their fists in the air. They had done something that should have been impossible. Catherine ordered Phase 2. She said to show the aliens what humans learned from their mistake. While the Council had been busy delivering their ultimatum, human intelligence agencies had been working. Every spy satellite and telescope and sensor on the planet had been studying the alien ships. They looked for weaknesses and they found several. The Council ships were designed for intimidation and pacification. They were not designed for real combat. They had not fought a serious war in 3,000 years. Their tactics were old and predictable and slow to adapt. Humans had been fighting wars against each other for all of recorded history. They understood violence in ways the aliens had forgotten. Catherine gave the order for all units to attack freely. She said to show the aliens why threatening Earth was a mistake. The battle for Earth's orbit had begun, and it would last 6 brutal hours. The Council's shock quickly turned into coordinated response. They were still more powerful and still had better technology. But they were fighting an enemy that learned and adapted with frightening speed. Tactical Officer Miran reported that the humans were learning their patterns. Each wave of human attacks was more effective than the last. The humans were processing alien responses and adjusting their tactics in real time. Zarek watched another cruiser take critical damage and could not believe what he was seeing. He said humans were primitives. Class 3 development level. They should not even have orbital combat capability. What Zarek did not understand was that humanity's greatest weapon was not technology. It was innovation born from desperation. On the ground, teams of engineers and scientists worked together frantically. Every piece of data from the battle was being analyzed and turned into new tactics within minutes. Someone discovered the alien beam weapons used a narrow frequency. They developed a reflective coating for missiles that reduced damage by 40%. 20 minutes later, missiles with the new coating were launching into space. Someone else noticed the alien point defense systems prioritized targets by speed and size. They sent swarms of small cheap drones at different velocities. The drones overwhelmed the alien targeting computers and wasted their firing time on decoys. Each adaptation and each innovation slowly changed the odds. Not enough to win, but enough to show the Council this would not be easy. Humanity was proving they belonged in this fight. The battle continued for hours, and every minute brought new surprises. The aliens were still more powerful, but humans kept finding new ways to fight back. On the ground, scientists watched the battle data and turned every observation into a weapon or a tactic. They worked faster than they had ever worked before, because lives depended on their creativity. In Australia, Maria Santos was already building an improved version of the frequency disruptor. She told her team they could push the alien shield recovery time from 30 seconds to 2 full minutes, but they needed much more power than they currently had. Major Peter Yang suggested redirecting output from a nuclear power plant that was 60 kilometers away. Maria immediately ordered the entire plant's power to be sent to their facility. She said they were going to hit the aliens again, and this time the shields would stay down much longer. Up in space, Commander Lisa Park was conducting a different kind of experiment aboard the ECS Defiance. The quantum cascade drive had worked perfectly, but Henry Clark had said it might be able to do more than just move a ship. Lisa asked what would happen if they opened a cascade point, but did not complete the transition. She wondered what it would do to anything near the rupture. Henry said over the communication channel that it was incredibly dangerous. The energies involved could tear her ship into pieces. Lisa asked again what it would do to nearby ships. There was silence as Henry ran calculations in his head. Then he said it would create a localized gravitational shear that would rip apart anything, not protected by inertial dampeners. Lisa asked if the Council ships had those dampeners. Henry said yes, they did, but if she could position the rupture directly against an alien hull and breach their outer shielding, the shear forces would tear through their internal structure before the dampeners could adjust. Lisa smiled and said she was sending attack coordinates immediately. The ECS Defiance moved through the battle like a dancer. It was too small and too fast for the alien weapons to track properly. Lisa positioned her ship right next to a Council destroyer so close that proximity alarms screamed warnings. Then she activated the drive for exactly 0.3 of a second. Space itself screamed in protest. The destroyer's entire left side crumpled inward like paper being crushed. Metal and composite materials folded in on themselves as gravitational forces that should not exist tore through the hull. The ship tumbled away, trailing air and debris and fluids. Lisa shouted that it worked. They had a new weapon. Henry warned her that the drive needed 20 minutes to recharge between uses. He told her to use it carefully because she only got one shot every 20 minutes. Lisa acknowledged and moved to find her next target. Back on Earth, General Catherine Hayes watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. Humans were losing, but they were losing slowly. Every hour they survived was another hour for their engineers to invent new solutions. Admiral Morrison warned that the aliens were pulling back to regroup. He said when they attacked again it would be with everything they had. Catherine nodded and said they needed to change the entire nature of the fight. She ordered someone to get her secure communication lines to every submarine commander, and every stealth aircraft pilot, and every special forces team on the planet. She said it was time for Operation Deep Strike. The Council thought they were fighting Earth's military. They were about to learn they were fighting 7 billion people who each refused to give up. In orbit, Commander Zarek held an emergency meeting with his ship captains. His mandibles clicked with frustration. He admitted they had underestimated the humans. He formally acknowledged the error, but he said they still had overwhelming force. He said they would reform their formations and coordinate their fire and systematically eliminate human resistance. Captain Felix from the cruiser Harmonious Dawn suggested they request reinforcements from the Council. He said this species was more dangerous than their initial assessment indicated. Zarek's sensory stalks flattened with anger. He asked if Velix wanted to admit that 43 ships could not handle one primitive world. He said no. They would complete the mission with the forces they had. He ordered all ships to prepare for a coordinated assault. He said they would demonstrate why the Council had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 cycles. What Zarek did not know was that far below in Earth's oceans and hidden in remote territories, humanity was preparing something that would change everything. The Council had the advantage in space, but humans had been fighting on their own planet for hundreds of thousands of years. It was time to bring the battle to their home ground. Operation Deep Strike began at dawn. All over the world, hidden assets activated at the same time. Submarines surfaced in coordinated positions and launched electromagnetic pulse missiles that had been modified to reach orbital heights. Stealth aircraft carrying experimental energy weapons flew to positions directly under the alien ships. But the real surprise came from an unexpected direction. On the Eternal Harmony, Tactical Officer Miran reported seismic activity. Multiple locations worldwide, massive energy buildups beneath the surface. Zarek demanded to know what the humans were doing. What humanity was doing was turning their own planet into a weapon. For 3 days while the Council focused on the space battle, engineering teams had worked around the clock. They repurposed every geothermal research station and tectonic monitoring facility. A geophysicist named Raymond Cole had proposed an audacious idea. If they could trigger controlled earthquakes, they could generate focused shockwaves that would propagate through the atmosphere like massive sonic booms. The Council ships were in low orbit to project their weapons effectively. That meant they were close enough to be touched by Earth's atmosphere, even if just barely. Catherine gave the command to fire. Beneath the Pacific Ocean and beneath the Himalayas and beneath the Andes, powerful explosives detonated along carefully calculated fault lines. The energy released was staggering. It was channeled and focused by geometric arrays of reflective panels that turned explosive force into directed acoustic weapons. The atmospheric shock waves rose up and slammed into the Council fleet, like the fist of an angry god. Ships tumbled as their inertial dampeners were overwhelmed by forces they were never designed to handle. Shields flickered and failed under sustained pressure. Communication systems scrambled as electromagnetic interference disrupted their coordination. The aliens had never imagined anyone would weaponize an entire planet's geological structure. Admiral Morrison shouted one word: now. Everything humanity had been holding in reserve launched at once. Railguns fired from hidden positions. Missiles screamed upward. Laser arrays focused on damaged vessels. The 4 quantum cascade ships materialized throughout the enemy formation, creating gravitational shears that tore at weakened hulls. The orbital battle descended into complete chaos, and the Council fleet had lost control of the situation. The chaos in orbit was complete, and the Council fleet was in trouble. 3 ships had been destroyed outright, and 5 more were critically damaged. Commander Zarek fought to restore order, but his carefully planned formations had collapsed. The humans were fighting with a creativity and ferocity that defied every tactical model the Council had ever used. Zarek ordered his fleet to withdraw to high orbit at 10,000 kilometers. He said they needed to reform and reassess the situation. His mandibles clicked in frustrated acknowledgement. These primitives had actually forced him to retreat. But as the alien ships pulled back, something else was happening on Earth. At facilities across the planet, Henry Clark's team had not stopped working. They had not built just 4 quantum cascade ships. They had built dozens of them. The ships were small and fast and armed with humanity's rapidly improving weapons. Commander Paul Grant reported that the first squadron was ready for launch. 20 ships with cascade drives, and each one crewed by volunteers who understood they might not come back. General Catherine Hayes spoke to the assembled pilots through video link. She told them they were about to become humanity's first real space combat force. She said the Council thought humans were too primitive and too limited by their own planet. She said the pilots were going to prove the aliens wrong. She said they would show the galaxy that humanity belonged among the stars and would fight for that right with everything they had. The pilots from every nation on Earth saluted together. Commander Lisa Park announced the squadron would launch in 3 minutes. She had been given command of this desperate mission. She reminded the pilots of their training. She said they were faster than the aliens now and told them to use that advantage. She said to hit hard and move fast and never give the enemy a stationary target. The ships launched and their cascade drives folded space. Suddenly Earth had a real fleet. The battle that followed would be remembered forever as the moment everything changed. Not because humanity won, but because humanity proved they could fight as equals. The human squadron moved through the Council formation like angry insects. Their cascade drives let them appear and strike and vanish before the enemy could respond. They targeted damaged vessels and finished what the ground weapons had started. They worked in coordinated groups, sharing targeting data in real time. They adapted to every defensive measure the Council tried. Captain Velix reported in disbelief that the humans were fighting like they had centuries of experience. He could not understand how it was possible. Zarek finally understood the truth. He said it was because for humans this was not new. They had been fighting wars against each other for their entire existence. They had just scaled up their tactics to space combat. The fleet commander made a decision that would change galactic history forever. He ordered all ships to cease fire. He told his communications officer to open a channel to the human command structure. The channel opened and General Catherine Hayes appeared on the screen. Her expression was hard and showed no mercy. Zarek identified himself and said he was authorized to negotiate a ceasefire. Catherine replied that humans were not interested in a ceasefire. She said they wanted the aliens to leave Earth's space and never come back. Zarek said that might be acceptable, but there were conditions. Catherine told him he was not in a position to set conditions. Zarek's mandibles clicked in what might have been resignation. He said she misunderstood. He said the conditions were for humanity's protection. He explained that the Council would not forget what happened here. There would be factions demanding retribution. There would be those who insisted Earth must be pacified regardless of cost. If Earth was to survive, humans had to be strong enough that attacking them became unthinkable. Catherine leaned forward and asked what he was proposing. Zarek said technology transfer, not everything because humans would destroy themselves with some of it, but enough. Shield generators and energy production and medical advances and material science, enough to accelerate human development by centuries. In return, humans would agree to Council protocols on expansion. They would not conquer other species. They would not spread uncontrolled across the galaxy. They would become members of the galactic community, but as equals, not subjects. Catherine asked if the Council would agree to this. Zarek said slowly that the Council would have no choice. He said he would report that humanity was not a Class 3 primitive species. They were a Class 1 emerging power. Dangerous and innovative and too costly to pacify. The Council avoided costly wars because they were bad for bureaucracy. Catherine smiled thinly and said she needed to consult with Earth's leadership. But she warned that if this was a trick or if he was stalling for reinforcements, humans would not stop innovating. She said every hour he gave them, they became more dangerous. Zarek replied that he was aware, and that was exactly why he was negotiating. The channel closed. Aboard the Eternal Harmony, Zarek's officer stood in stunned silence. Tactical Officer Miran finally spoke and said the Council would question this decision. There would be consequences for Zarek. He agreed, but said the alternative was to fight a species that turned their own planet into a weapon after 3 days. He said he did not want to see what humans would become after 3 years or 30 years. He said they came to pacify primitives but found something far more dangerous, a species that refused to be pacified. On Earth, world leaders debated through the night. Some argued for continued resistance. Others recognized an opportunity. President Daniel Harper made the final decision. He said they fought for the right to determine their own destiny, and now they had it. He said they would accept Zarek's proposal, but on their own terms. They would join the galactic community as equals, not subordinates. They would maintain their right to develop and expand and defend themselves however they saw fit. The treaty was signed 48 hours later in neutral space aboard a Council diplomatic vessel. Earth had struck back and the galaxy would never be the same. 5 years later, the Terran Alliance maintained diplomatic relations with over 200 species. Human ships powered by hybrid technology explored regions of space that had been uncharted for thousands of years. Henry Clark received a joint scientific prize for his Cascade drive. Maria Santos became Earth's first ambassador to the Council's Scientific Directorate. Catherine Hayes retired and wrote a book about how humanity won its freedom. It became required reading at the new Terran Space Force Academy. Commander Zarek included a warning in his report to the Galactic Council. He wrote that humanity was defined by one characteristic above all others. They did not accept limits. Not from nature and not from physics, and certainly not from those who presumed to rule them. They turned disadvantages into weapons and primitive technology, into innovations the Council had never conceived. Any species that underestimated them did so at their peril. He wrote that the Council's greatest achievement was not pacifying humanity but choosing not to try. The warning was distributed to every member species, and it was heeded. Humanity expanded into the stars not as conquerors but as the galaxy's reminder that peaceful coexistence was better than war, with a species that viewed the impossible as merely inconvenient.